Chapter 1. Overview. It doesn't matter what industry it's used in or what size it is. The essentials of erecting and dismantling scaffolding are the same. When you walk away from a scaffold, it has to be 100% correct. Other people depend on you doing it right. When you don't follow the essentials, the results can be death, destruction, and injury. People can build scaffolding up to 4 meters high without a basic license, but they do need to be trained properly. Any scaffolding which is over 4 meters high requires the scaffolders to have a high-risk license. This DVD is about how to erect, alter, and dismantle modular scaffolding. Modular means all these different pieces fit together. The 3 main parts of the erected scaffold are a lift, which goes up, a panel, which goes across, and the bay, which is the area enclosed by 4 standards next to each other. 2 people can erect a scaffold up to 4 meters. Higher than that, you need 3 or more people to erect the scaffold. You've got to have a plan of how you're going to work. Be aware of hazards and follow any safety procedures. A hazard is something that can create a risk. It could harm someone. You need to understand any drawings or plans that are needed for the job. Make sure the ground conditions will bear the load of the scaffolding and people and equipment. You need to understand the manufacturer's instructions and select and inspect the right equipment for the job. You must know how to work safely at heights when you erect and dismantle a scaffold. Scaffolders must be trained in every aspect of fall prevention. Every lift must be fully decked. That means all the planks are fitted in. This is a construction platform, and it's where you stand, on both feet, when you erect or dismantle a scaffold. The scaffold must be erected 1 bay at a time. This is called sequential erection. There must be safe access to the scaffold using a stairway or a ladder. A working platform is where tradespeople work, and it must have guardrails, mid-rails, and toe boards. This is called full edge protection and prevents people and equipment falling from the scaffold. You've got to understand all the steps from start to finish so you can erect scaffolding correctly. And you must also understand all the steps in how to dismantle it correctly. If you don't understand anything, ask your supervisor. Finally, part of your job is to clean up and put away safely. How you do your job, scaffolding, affects your safety, and also the safety of the workers who use the scaffolding that you've put up. Chapter 2. Plan the job. Plan the whole job. Check for any hazards where you're going to be working. Check the scaffolding components, all the different parts that fit together that you'll be using, and check the tools you need for the job. Wear the right safety gear. You come onto the site wearing the right PPE, personal protective equipment. The basic personal protective equipment you must wear is a hard hat, high-vis gear, and steel-capped work boots. Depending on the requirements of the work site and the job, you can also wear safety gloves, eye protection, hearing protection, masks, and sun protection. Some work sites require that you wear long-sleeved shirts and long trousers. Have a toolbox meeting on site before you start the job and do a SWMS, a safe work method statement. Everybody working on the scaffold discusses every part of the job and what the hazards are. Each person has their own responsibility. The sort of things you need to plan are a safe means of access to the scaffold working platform. This can be an access ladder bay or stair access. You plan this before you build the scaffold. Know who is going to use the scaffold and what they need. You need to know the maximum load you are allowed to put on the scaffold. A dead load is the total weight of the scaffold and all its components, everything that makes up the actual scaffold. A live load means people, materials, tools, or equipment, things which move. The type of load determines the type of scaffold you erect. A light scaffold has a maximum weight of 225 kilograms. A medium scaffold has a maximum weight of 450 kilograms. A heavy-duty scaffold has a maximum weight of 675 kilograms. The wider the scaffold, the less weight you can have. You need to work out how you get onto the scaffold. This is called access on. And how you get out of the scaffold. This is called egress off. Always hold onto the ladder until you're fully off the scaffold. Grab the ladder with both hands before placing your foot on the rung. Have 3 points of contact with the ladder. You need to know what to do in an emergency.
Assemble over the oval near automotive. Take time.
What permits you might need, for example, hot work permits. Assess the worksite for hazards. You identify a hazard. Then you control it, you do something about it, and you write down the hazard and what you did to control it in the swims. There are all sorts of hazards. You've got to think about everyone's safety. Yours, fellow workers, worksite visitors, and members of the public. The weather can be a hazard, if it's too hot, too cold, windy or wet. Lighting. Make sure there's enough light to do the job. Check for power cables overhead and on the ground. Check for things you can trip over. Use restricted access barriers and signs to keep people away from working areas. Look out for surrounding structures that can affect the scaffolding. Look out for temporary fences. And check the surface where you're going to erect the scaffolding. Look out for anything that could cause an unsafe work situation. Every part of the job needs to be planned, for your safety and everyone else's safety. Chapter 3. Select and inspect. Make sure you've got the right type of scaffolding and tools for the job. Check every one of the components. That's all the parts that fit together of the scaffolding. Check you've got all the components you need and check that they are not damaged. This is a standard. Standards always go vertically, that's up and down, and are the main structural parts of a scaffold. Do not mix steel and aluminium standards in the same scaffold. Standards must comply with the Australian Standards of Scaffolding. The sole plate is used to stop the scaffold sinking into the ground. It evenly distributes the weight. The base plate supports the standards. You use this when the surface is perfectly even. Mostly, use an adjustable base plate. It's used on surfaces that are not level or even. Planks can be steel or wood, but mostly steel planks are used. A ledger is round and goes horizontally, that's a cross, and connects two standards. A ledger also acts as a guardrail and a mid-rail. A transom is flat and connects standards together at the end of the scaffold and supports the planks. This is a longitudinal brace, and it is 3.6 metres long. It goes from the top to the bottom of the scaffold on an angle. It's always on the outside of the scaffold. A transverse brace is 2 metres long and is fitted to each end of the scaffold. Ties are tubes of different lengths and thicknesses. We use ties to join the scaffold onto something which is strong and stable enough to support the scaffold and stop it moving in or out. You also have a ladder putt log. This creates the opening for the ladder to pass through and supports the planks. This is a toe board, which is also called a kickboard. These are toe board clips, and they hold toe boards in place and keep them from moving. These are hop-up brackets. Tie bars connect to the hop-up bracket and keep the planks in place. There are also the connections, the parts that hold the components together. The star couplers, also called V-pressings, end fittings, the wedge, the spigot, and the box wedge. Couplers are the fittings which hold the tubes together, swivel couplers which turn, and right angle couplers which don't turn. If any of these components are damaged, tag it, remove it from service, and report and record it. Check you've got the right tools for the job, and check the tools are okay. If anything is damaged, replace it. Basic tools for most jobs are a podger hammer, an adjustable wrench, a spirit level, a scaffold spanner, also called a scaffold key. Use a scaffold belt to carry those tools. You also use a folding rule or measuring tape. Chapter 4. Erect the scaffold. Before you start erecting the scaffold, make sure no one is in the scaffold area who shouldn't be there. Check that the ground or work surfaces are level. Check that they are clean so that there's no rubbish or trip hazards in the work area. Look up and check there are no hazards. Have a toolbox meeting. Erect the scaffold as close as you can to the working face. This is the wall of the building where the work will be done. Choose the point where you're going to start, where you're going to put the first standard. Measure the overall length to make sure the scaffold will fit into the space. Put the sole plate on the ground. Make sure it's level and fully supported by the surface it's on. Measure the length of the sole plate to make sure the sole plates are long enough for the width of the scaffold. Put the adjustable base plate in the middle of the sole plate. Put the first two standards on the adjustable base plates. The lowest star faces inwards and the box wedge faces out. Attach the transom. You can use a ledger if it does not have to support planks. Position the third standard. Put in the ledger. Position the fourth standard and put in the second ledger. This is your base. Make sure the two standards closest to the wall are an equal distance from the wall. Measure diagonally to make sure the bay is square. Then level 3 sides of the base. Put in the transoms on the first lift. The transoms are flat and will hold the planks. Then put in the 2 ledgers. Recheck your measurements to make sure nothing has moved. Check that the standards are plumb. That means it's straight, up and down. You erect a scaffold 1 bay at a time. Install the access bay. Put in the planks. Make sure there are no gaps between the planks. Put on the transverse brace at one end of the scaffold. Put a transverse brace on the other end of the scaffold. Then put a transverse brace on the access bay. Now put in the guardrail at 1 metre from the construction platform. That's where you stand when you erect the scaffold. The guardrail is to stop the scaffolder falling off. Put on the longitudinal brace. Each end bay has to have a longitudinal brace. Repeat the same steps for the next lift. Standards, ledges, transoms. Put on the transverse brace. Put the planks into the second lift. This is the working platform, where tradespeople can work safely. Put the mid-rail onto the working platform. Then the guardrail. Repeat this. Mid-rail, then guardrail. Do this bay by bay. A tie is required if the height of a scaffold is going to exceed the smallest base width of the scaffold by 3 times. Attach a tube vertically to the wall between 2 tie pins. You use 90-degree couplers, the ones that don't turn. Then attach a tube horizontally from the vertical tie tube to the ledges. Put in safety couplers on the standard above the wedge so the ledges cannot be dislodged. Do this on all 4 corners of the bay. Do this at both ends of the scaffold. Next, install the toe boards on the working platform. Attach the toe board clips. The whole working platform must have toe boards, a guardrail and a mid-rail. This is called edge protection and prevents people and objects from falling off the scaffold. Next, install the ladder access. Take away 5 planks. Put in the ladder access putt log. Put in 3 long and 2 short planks. This creates the opening for the ladder to pass through. Then, clip the ladder to the guardrail. The scaffold is complete. The standards are always uneven at the top, so if you need to, you can continue building upwards. This is called topping up. The scaff tag is an information tag attached to the scaffold. It provides information to the users of the scaffold about the stage of completion of the scaffold, when it's been inspected, its safe working load, who erected it, and who the authorised scaffolder is for alterations. Nobody except the authorised scaffolder is allowed to make alterations to this scaffold. Gin wheels are sometimes used, depending on the height of a scaffold. To move things up and down the scaffold, you can use a gin wheel with a 16mm fibre rope. Or you can use a 12mm fibre rope to move things up and down hand over hand. When you are using fibre rope, you need to know how to do splicing and whipping. You also need to know how to do bends and hitches so you can tie equipment up safely and then move it up and down the scaffold. Use a clove hitch for round objects. Use a timber hitch for planks.
Okay, you going to hold the rope?
You must always work safely at heights. You usually don't have to wear a safety harness when you're erecting or dismantling a scaffold. But if you are working with no fall protection, you do need to wear safety equipment. This is a safety harness with energy absorber. And this is an inertia reel which works with a safety harness. When you've finished your scaffold, fill in a handover certificate which has all the relevant information about the scaffold. Chapter 5. Dismantle the scaffold. First of all, do a swims. Plan what you are going to do. Look for hazards again, same as you did when erecting the scaffolding. Put barriers and signs up. Wear the correct personal protective equipment and have the right tools for the job. When you dismantle a scaffold, it's the opposite of how it goes up. The last thing on is the first thing off. Take the ladder off. Put 5 middle planks in so you have somewhere to stand. Take 3 long and 2 short planks out. Take the access putt log out. put 5 long planks back in. This is where you work safely from. Remove the horizontal ties, then the vertical ties. Remove the guardrails. Start at the back first, then the end, then the front. This is for fall protection. Next, remove the mid-rails. Hand things down to the ground person. Make sure the gear is going down to the ground and is not a hazard on the scaffold. Never throw anything off a scaffold. It's dangerous. Take the planks out. Remove the transoms and ledges. Remove the standards. Remove the longitudinal braces. The transverse braces. At the base, remove the standards, the adjustable base plates, and the sole boards. Identify and count all the scaffold components and check them for damage. Pack all the dismantled scaffold components into individual stillages. Each component has its own stillage. Everything's got a place, and this helps safety and efficiency. Clear all the equipment, tools and rubbish away. A forklift would then load the stillages onto the back of a truck. The job's been done properly.